Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Aries Leviathan, and I'm going to give you a quick head note before the story for tonight begins. It's an old folk tale I once read when I was a child, and I do not recall where I first heard it or who had written the original story, but I know it was intended to be told late at night, just like this one, with the company of others, such as you, around the crackle of a fire. This is my retelling of this story, naturally with some embellishments. I have also taken it upon myself to read it in a standard English accent. So, if anyone from England is listening and you hear me butcher this language of yours, I apologize. But I feel that the story calls for someone to read it with such an accent in the way I have written it. So, without further ado, I shall read the story for all of you. A Cry for Death. Written, retold, and narrated by Daniel Jones. A very long time ago, when the ancient forests were young and vibrant, there lived two men in a quiet village. The first of them, he will be called Darwin, was one with a genteel heart and was quite the reader. He had been known to read any book he could get his hands on. Honestly, it was one of the few things he could physically do. See, Darwin, since birth, was constantly ill, which debilitated him to a state of near death. He had been bedridden all of his life, and was often accused of being a hypochondriac. To see him out of his bed without coughing, wheezing, or sneezing would indeed be a rare occasion. During these few times, he would feel spirited and quite jovial, and often thought perhaps he had finally overcome his disease. Of course, his positivity would only last until the next day, when his fits would start up all over again, and he'd solemnly return to his bed. He spent most of his days shut up within his late parents' estate, and almost never went outside. Being shut in from the world meant he did not have many friends, and lived a rather reclusive life, having only an old caretaker who'd visit every morning to bathe him and bring him food, medicine, and, of course, books. For nearly 30 years he lay in that bed, hacking and whooping. The other man, he would be called Neil, was a most handsome and fit man, one of the strongest in town. The ladies adored him, and the men admired him, even if they were rather jealous of his fortunate appearance. Never had he known a sick day in his life. Thus his mother always prided herself, claiming to have the healthiest child a mother could have. Neil himself was lost in his own glory, and would often boast about how lucky he was to be so gifted in mind, body, and soul. He could often be found drinking and frolicking in the town pub until he would stagger out of the doors to his home on the other side of the village. However, he was also prone to mischief, such as stealing chickens and blaming it on the foxes, or throwing mud on freshly cleaned cloth. He was quite clever, at least enough to keep himself out of trouble, and only spoke of his tricks to a very select few who he had sworn to secrecy. Oh, he was a sly one. He had a sharp tongue and a good wit which helped him deny any fault. He would often pass the ailing Darwin's window on his way home from a few rounds of old Benny's whiskey. He had always declared that he would surely outlive poor Darwin, who could very easily pass away at a moment's notice. One late evening, as an imbibed Neil found himself stumbling by Darwin's window, he heard him doing his nightly routine of panting, heaving, and gagging. Neil had always found it somewhat of a nuisance, and got it into his head to have some fun with the lame man. There was a familiar glimmer in his eye, and it was clear he was up to no good. He called through the window, "Hark, Brother Darwin! You have been feverish these 30-some years. Why don't you just call out for death so that he can end it all? Perhaps it would simply be better if you were dead." Weakly, and almost a whisper, Darwin cried out, "I have tried calling out for death many times before, but he cannot hear me. I am too weak." "Oh, my dear brother," Neil sneered, a devilish smile creeping across his face. "Tonight is All Hallows' Eve, and death is lurking the wood and field, in search of a soul to send to bliss or woe. I'm sure if you cry loud enough, he most certainly will hear you." Persuaded, Darwin whimpered, "Death, oh death, give me mercy, and take this weary soul." Neil found it greatly amusing to hear Darwin's feeble and vain attempt to end his life. Do try again, dear fellow. I do not think even the mice in your walls could hear you," he taunted. Once more the fragile man groaned, slightly less audible and more pitiful than the previous attempt. "Death, oh death, I beg of you, release me from my earthly bonds from which I suffer so." For a moment, the two stayed in utter silence, but neither angel nor devil did come. Neil was now heavily enjoying his playful torment. Neil marked his second attempt by raising his palm to his ear and exclaimed, "Hail, a whisper I hear! Perhaps he hath heard you this time, though he suspects perhaps it is merely the wind I fear. I implore, try thrice more, as loud as you can. Surely then Hades will hear your plea." With great agony, Darwin tried a third time. He raised his voice as loud as he could muster. His throat ached and burned, his eyes watered, and his lips were dry. He croaked, "Death, oh sweet death, come, I implore, I implore. Oh, agent of fame or foul, I pray no more, no more." Alas, despite his efforts, only a pathetic utterance could be heard from the window. Darwin finished his summons by throwing a ghastly fit of coughs into his kerchief. Then the two again stayed still, but no sweet phantom did follow. Neil was having trouble suppressing his glee, and even a hearty snicker slipped through his lips. "Alas, my dear friend, but death has ventured on. Truly, you are too weak to call for death, and even the banshees will pass your door and never wail for you." Then he thought of an idea to fuel his fancy. This was no doubt his greatest scheme, and oh, a tale it would be. However, perhaps if I caught him, he would come to you hence and finally take you from this cruel purgatory you have endured. His smile was as wide as the moon. Yea, for you, pure and brotherly soul, I will call forth your salvation. Darwin, grateful for no longer having to strain, quietly thanked Neil for his offer, suspecting him little of his fiendish game, and said, You are a dear friend and comrade, Neil. It is no wonder you have been blessed in this life with more praise than St. Paul himself. I shall put in a merry word with the angels above upon my release. Indeed, anything for one so needy. As for myself, no glory shall I partake. It is duty that is my calling. For if a man hath no love in his heart for his brothers, he is not worthy of being a man at all. Neil, now rich with hilarity, gave a mighty cackle. He planted himself into a stance so strong he looked he could hold a crumbling tower. He brought up both hands and sang with a thundering clamour out into the forest beyond. His voice bellowed far across the land, and it seemed even old Nick would be able to hear his voice from the lowest of pits. Death! Oh, death! Come and take this soul that cries to you in the night from afar. Take it thus far away from here, so that it will be seen no more. At that moment, without pause, Neil heard a jostle coming from the thicket ahead. Before him stood a pale, cloaked figure with white, cloudy eyes. It came forth and beckoned him with a long, skinny hand. The air felt foul, and brought with it an even fouler odour, which tickled his nose. It spoke with a voice as cold as winter, and moaned like a storm wind. Come have I to take the one that beckons me, he said with an icy breath. Neil was stunned, to say the least. He had not expected the spirit to appear. Maintaining his composure, he pointed to the window. He lieth yonder in his bedchamber within. He hath been calling you many times this late evening. I have not heard him, quoth the fiend. Indeed, hence I called you forth in his stead, Neil said assuredly. His brow began to moisten with cold dew. No more could he hear the wind rustling in the trees, nor the creatures of the wood. Indeed. However, still come have I for the one that beckons me, quoth the wraith, as he raised a single brown and rotted finger and pointed in Neil's direction. In a moment of sobered clarity, Neil's eyes widened. A dense fog crawled across the earth, and the stars went out one by one. Neil pressed himself against the boards of Darwin's homestead, and took in one last breath as the shadowy creature approached him. Darwin, still breathless, struggled to keep his head lifted to see through the window, could now only see Neil, whom, despite his apparent strength, being dragged away, wailing and screaming into the abysmal forest like an irritable child Despite being chilled to his core, for a moment, Darwin smiled and gave a weak chuckle as he saw the irony of the affair that transpired, and saluted death on his sense of humour. And yet pray did he for the poor soul of Neil. After that evening, Darwin made a miraculous recovery, and was restored to his full vitality. Folk in the village always said he looked unusually able and firm among the other men, but he always remained kind and polite to everyone he encountered. Now that his strength had returned, he looked to make good use of it. He would tutor the children in their morning readings, work in the fields at dusk, and entertain the tavern upon nightfall. On late nights he would entertain them by telling the people of the town songs and poems and fantastic ventures he read in his books. But the town favourite of them all was always the haunting story of Neil's fall from grace. But when All Hallows Eve would come around, Darwin's demeanour would change. He would continue to tell his stories, but would always keep that particular story to himself, with a solemn look on his face. "Never shall I tell the tale on this particular night," he would say. "Already have I called for death 3 times in my life on All Hallows Eve. I dare not try it a 4th, for fear I shall suffer an ill fate." For 10 long and happy years, Darwin stayed in the village, loving and being loved by all. But upon the 10th year to the day he recovered from his dreadful ailment, 10 whole years after Neil was taken from this world, Darwin disappeared without a trace. All but a few of his belongings remained within his estate. Some say he called for death 1 more time. Some folk claimed he was dragged away shrieking into the night after he foolishly recounted his tale on All Hallows Eve. Others declare he embraced the hooded spectre willingly, and you can still see the 2 of them walking through the wood at night. And yet, even some believe he simply left the town to do work elsewhere. But all these rumours end the same. Neither Neil nor Darwin were ever seen in the town again.